Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I was contacted by JayZee Games in order to review their game Chroma, coming soon to Gamefound. It's an engine building game that uses the CMYK color mixing foundation that you see in printers and takes that into a small engine building card game. In this video, we're going to be reviewing the game, looking at the pros, the neutrals, as well as the cons, give you an overall rating, recommendations, and see if this is going to be a game that's right for you to back in this upcoming Gamefound project. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please make sure that you do. It is the best way to help us grow. And for those of you already subscribed, thank you so much for the continuous support. Let's get started talking about Chroma. Before we begin, I do want to quickly mention that a copy of Chroma was provided to SideGame LLC at no cost or expense to us for review purposes. We also received a couple of smaller games by JayZee Games that we can also look at, but we won't be reviewing them here. With that all being said, let's do a quick review of Chroma. This is a color mixing game where you are going to be vying for 3 different win conditions. On your turn, you're going to be using these cards in your hand, a bunch of different colors, and you're either going to play a card in front of you, generally activating its effect or getting some continuous bonus. You're going to be recalling your cards back into your hand, or you are going to be taking cards from your hand and mixing them together. All of the cards have the contents and the pigments that make them up on the side of the card. For example, this soft cyan here is simply just that, cyan, but if you mix it with jungle, which is cyan and yellow, that gets you turquoise, which has that double cyan and single yellow. So when you do decide to mix your cards, you lose the other two, put them into their appropriate piles or discard piles, and then add the new card to your hand. You're able to use its abilities. These cards are going to scale up in power level as your level 1s are the most basic, the 2s start getting more interesting effects, and then your level 3s are super powerful, but finally you'll end with those level 4 cards, which are your win condition cards. This game balances 3 different win conditions. You have Sapphire strategy, which means that you win immediately if that card's in front of you and you have 16 cards in your hand. You have Ruby, which means you need one of every single one of these endgame cards just in front of you and you win automatically. And lastly is the Emerald Green strategy, which says that you win if you have 17 victory points. You don't actually have to have that one out on the board, but it does provide 6 victory points, which means it gets you a good majority of the way towards that 17 points. So that is something to be aware of. You do have these 3 different victory point conditions that are in contention. And the way that you're going to be adding these cards is from a large market in the center. You'll have these basic yellow, magenta, as well as cyan colors that you'll be mixing and matching, playing to gather cards, and you'll start running an engine by building these new cards by mixing them together, putting them out in front of you, benefiting from their special effects, and trying to move up those ranks, getting to more powerful cards so you can build towards one of those win conditions. That's our overview for Chroma. Let's get into the review portion, starting off with our pros. And my highest pro is the simple system. I love that you have one of 3 basic actions that you're going to be picking from every turn. You're either playing a card with the print action, you're mixing 2 cards from your hand together to make a new one, giving you new options, and then lastly, you can refill and reclaim the cards that you've worked so hard to make and get to play them again and use their effects. Simple framework, and it makes the game easy to get into from an action sense, and then the complexity comes from those different cards, effects, and how they work together, and how they lead to those different win conditions. It's a fun thing to discover initially as you're looking through all of the cards and wondering, how is this going to play into my strategy towards those win conditions? And speaking of those win conditions, the balanced routes to victory is another positive here. Every time that you're going for a specific strategy, whether it be the Ruby, getting those 3 different gems out, Sapphire, just collecting a bunch of cards, or getting a variety of cards out in front of you that are worth points, they feel viable, and each of the cards plays into them in different ways. You may want to be getting cards to just give you a bunch of level 1 cards every single time you do something, and you're just hoarding all of these cards, trying to retain as many as possible in your hand. If you're going for a point victory, you're putting out all of these interesting cards in front of you and using special abilities every single turn. It feels great to build up this excellent tableau. And lastly, that Ruby victory is going to encourage you to, as efficiently as possible, mix different things, and so you're looking for cards that feed into that. It's a great feeling knowing that you have a chance in the strategy that you're pursuing to actually win the game. And my last positive are the small abilities with strong effects that come from the cards you're going to be mixing into each other. Aside from your starting cards and your win condition cards, every other card is going to facilitate some form of gameplay that when you put it down on the field, you read its effect, you understand what that card does, and then you see the implications of that as the game progresses. For example, orange here allows you, when you mix together new colors, you can immediately play that card. This conserves you actions, and it's going to make everything you do just that much more efficient. I love this, as you're going to be propelling yourself further and further. The other actions here, raspberry, this one lets you immediately take a level 1 when you play it, and then also you're going to be able to mix multiple cards cards from your hand in a single mix action. Normally you have to mix one card and one other card and add those different colors, but with this you can use all those level 1s that you've been collecting and in a super mix action combine them into one large card. Lots of flexibility, easy to understand, and a strong effect. And let's look at pair here too. This pair says that whenever you play a card, you get to add a level 1 card to your hand. So it encourages you to play the cards that you've been creating as the game has progressed. I like that you can get a combination of these, but they're easy to understand and they affect each of those phases differently. And these level 3 continuous cards are my favorite because they give you this small mini objective you're going towards during the early portions of the game, and when you finally get it out, it's such a satisfying feeling that's going to change your entire playstyle and tempo of the rest of the game. Totally satisfying. Those are the small abilities with strong effects. And the last pro that I want to include is something that I found amazing. This was the color choices that leaned into the theming of the CMYK design. So the theming as well as those color choices. I love the way that the cards are going to get more saturated as you continue mixing those colors. They start off super light with your light yellows, your pale magentas, and your cyans, but as you get into those deeper colors, the ruby red, the sapphire blue, it starts to get more and more saturated and you can see it well. You also have some flavor text on the bottom here that play into the theming more and give you some overviews as to these color mixes and choices. Now I did enjoy this a lot. I did meet a couple of people that I played this with though that did not like these color choices. They found it a little hard on the eyes, which I thought was interesting. And honestly, it reminded me of the effect like Into the Spider-Verse, if you've seen that movie, where you initially see it and it gives your eyes a little trip when you start looking at it, but then it's something that you start to appreciate the more you play. For me, I enjoyed seeing this right away, something that I like. I like the art style as well as the theming of this game. Moving on to the neutrals, I mentioned the flavor text a little bit before, and that's my biggest neutral here is flavor text on cards over explanations of what the cards do. Now, after your first play of the game, you're going to understand what most of these cards do after that you've seen and read their effects once. It'll start to make sense, becomes a bit more intuitive with the iconography, but initially this can be a barrier to understanding as you are not having the information right there at hand, and it is something that you're going to have to look up, and that could be pretty frustrating. That being said, after that first play, I love the flavor text. I think it brings that theming out more. It gives you more information about these colors that you're mixing, and some of them have fun facts about the CMYK system in general. Something I love in games is good flavor text, and I think it does it well, but it does suffer from that initial play because of that lack of clarification on the cards. And that leads us straight into the first con, which also has to do with the iconography, but also the icon reference. And this is a huge barrier to entry because as you can see on most of these cards, you're going to have these symbols that do repeat pretty often. Light yellow, instantly, you can recall a card, but you can recall just one card. Pale magenta, when you play it, instantly you get a blue or a yellow to your hand. But this is not the case for a lot of the different symbols. Sometimes you're going to have symbols that deviate from the iconography that are on these reference cards. And that's a big deal to me. When your reference cards is supposed to give you all of the information needed to decipher what the abilities of the cards do, but then you are looking at it, trying to figure out what certain things mean, and those patterns and symbols just aren't there. And that means that you're going to be diving into the rulebook for your entirety of your first game, and it's going to make you not as excited as you keep on diving into the rulebook, trying to decipher things, not having a good time with putting it all together. Now, this is apparent during that first play, and it's something you're going to feel. You're going to be in this rulebook looking through everything, but after you read the effects, it's going to make sense. Let's take a look at the lavender card here. It has the instant effect at the top, so we know that symbol. We know the hand symbol, the play symbol. We've got the 2 or higher on the rank, but a lot of these other symbols aren't actually present on the sheet. We have something that looks sort of like card in your play area, but it's got a slash on it. We've got an X and a Y, and unsure what it actually means, which means you're going to actually ignore that reference sheet because it doesn't give you all the information you need. You're going to need to go into that rulebook to understand what's going on, and then after you read it, you start understanding and associating the meaning to those new symbols and icons. I wish that there was a redone version of this player aid reference, just telling you the abilities and allowing you to add meaning to those symbols after you've read their ability initial time. I think it takes at least one time to take a look. For example, Lavender says, when this card is played, okay, I get it now, when you play it, you return a rank 2 or higher card in your hand or play area, so that's what those 2 icons mean. To the supply, okay, doesn't mention that on the symbology. Then add 2 cards with the same total pigments to your hand, okay, so they go into your hand, and then you play them. Okay, that's why we're doing the 2 different play cards here for X and Y. So X is that first card that you create, and Y is that second card that you create, and that's why they're on that left side here. There's a lot of information that's on this card, and after you understand the ability, it'll make sense. So this is apparent in generally your first play of the game and subsequent plays when you're teaching new people to understand. And I think that seeing as it's all in the rule book, it's something you're going to be in a lot, I figured that you should just make the reference cards the abilities of these cards, or a clarification. Maybe not all of the minutia and the small notes, because there are some clarifications. For example, the coral here says unless you have raspberry, some of the cards may activate only once during a certain activation. That is something to be aware of, but I think just a general overview of what each card does individually instead of a collection of icons, not including all of them. I think it's a mistake here, and I think we need to have something that gives us that full detail so everyone has access to what each of those cards mean, and you're not passing that rulebook around to people that don't understand the whole time. So that's something to be aware of, is the iconography and the reference itself are not that helpful when it comes to understanding the abilities of the 2s and the 3s, and sometimes even the level 4s, unless it's explicitly taught to you. So something to be aware of with my first con there. My second con has to do with the replayability and the similar play styles that emerge because of the way that the win conditions are tied to the different ability cards. If you're going for the Sapphire strategy, of course you're going to be starting to go for cards that are adding copious amounts of cards to your hand. Same thing with the green, you're going to want to play these continuous cards that have victory point values, and with red, you're going to need to buy cards that allow you to mix efficiently. Yes, there's going to be some overlap on these strategies and cards that work towards each, but because of the consistency and reliability of the market with set amounts of cards in each and the rate at which they're being pulled, you're going to be leaning into similar play patterns from game to game when you're pursuing the different strategies. You're going to see something out there on your first turn, and then once you start going for it, that will be the strategy and the play style that will emerge from that experience. There's not a lot of things that you can do to change this. The modularity from this game comes from that initial market setup, and that is what's setting you down your path for the rest of the game. None of these additional random elements, aside from those random draws, but as mentioned before, because of that consistency and reliability, you're going to have the options present that you need to pursue specific strategies. So that is the replayability of this game, my second con. And my last con goes to the solo variant. The solo variant's easy to set up. You're going to be taking 3 of each of the basic color cards, plus you're taking your 3 mix cards, shuffling them all up into a single deck, and then once you have that constructed, every time it's the enemy's turn, you're going to draw 2 cards from the deck, and if one of those mixed cards get revealed, you're going to actually take some of the revealed cards, mix them together for something available in the market, and then add those cards you mixed plus the new card to an Automa discard pile. You're going to be doing this until the Automa actually completes one of the existing win conditions. It's also going to be, when it's mixing, going to be varying the different cards that it's going to try to pick up. So you're always having to look at the different colors and pieces, and you're thinking about which of the options are available, and this leads me to this feeling that I am playing a less interesting game for a longer amount of time with this solo management than I am my actual engine building experience with Chroma Mix. And that's something that I don't really like in these solo modes, when I'm spending more time with this management and not my turn than I am on my turn. One of the ways I like to play this game is the 2-player mode, because you're able to play so lightning fast. You're taking your turn, one single action, and you just can make a streamlined approach to playing card after card. It's a good, satisfying feeling. But in this solo mode, you're going to be having to interrupt your thought process, go and manage this less interesting minigame to the side that serves as a timer for your actual turns. I wish that this was a simplified solo variant where maybe you just have a set amount of turns, there's no fiddly minigame that you have to perform, and it's not something that I'm interested in returning to. And that's my final con. That is the solo mode for Chroma Mix. And that brings us to our last section here. This is my final rating and my final thoughts. Chroma Mix is going to receive a 6 out of 10 from me from using the Board Game Geek scale. That means it's an okay game. There are some fun or challenge at least, and I'll play sporadically if I'm in the right mood. Now, overall, my favorite things about Chroma Mix, I like that small, simple action system. You're playing a card, you're recalling them, or you are going to be mixing cards in your hand to make new ones. I like the balanced routes to victory and how you are not falling behind from picking a specific strategy. And I also enjoy the small abilities with powerful, strong effects that are included included on those level 2 and level 3 cards in particular. My neutrals have to do with that mix of flavor text versus information and how you grow to appreciate it, but it can be pretty unfortunate to start. And leaning into that further, starting with my cons, that iconography is a huge issue where the icon reference is not super useful at all, and I just prefer extra copies of that reference in the back of the rulebook for everybody. And next is the replayability. I think it does suffer from that with having those repetitive play patterns, just because of how consistent and reliable that market is and how you need to do certain things to pursue certain strategies. And if you do decide to pivot, it's going to be unfortunate, as you're going to fall behind as you try to do too much stuff. And then lastly is the solo mode. I did not like the solo mode at all. That fiddly management, that extra minigame that I had to manage, and I couldn't focus my time on playing my own game. I'd much prefer just a more simple timer or a set amount of turns, something like that. So my final rating, that is a 6 out of 10. And that's it. That's my review for Chroma Mix. I'm going to give a big thank you to JayZee Games for sending us a copy of Chroma Mix for review purposes and trusting us to give a critical, honest review looking at the pros, the neutrals, and the cons. With that being said, I'm curious to know if Chroma Mix is something that you're interested in backing. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check out the Gamefound page, maybe take a look at some other reviewers and see their opinions on the game, see how that solo mode plays yourself, or see if our opinions align on these different aspects. I'm curious to hear what you think about the flavor text ideas, mixing that over that information on the cards, that neutral. What do you think of the art style, the theming, the engine building, games like this? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Chroma Mix in general, and if this is one that you're looking to check out. But thank you so much for watching. SideGame Strong.